Welcome to E101, Understanding the Basics of Reporting to the Toxics Release Inventory, and that is known as the TRI. And today, my name is Jennifer Collins. I'm the manager of the Compliance Assistance and Pollution Prevention section here at Indiana Department of Environmental Management. And it is my pleasure to invite you to this event, and hopefully it will answer a lot of your questions about the toxics release inventory and also pollution prevention. We're getting to cover some of that today. And I also have the wonderful pleasure of managing the Compliance and Technical Assistance Program, and so you will also hear about that program. These series, the E101 series, are meant for environmental managers at facilities around the state. And we want to provide you information that is useful in your day-to-day jobs in managing your compliance requirements at your facilities. We know that all of you may not be trained in environmental studies or have an environmental background, and that is the purpose of these events, to bring you information at a basic level for you to take with you and apply at your operation. So we are truly grateful that you have joined us here today, and it is my pleasure to introduce my colleagues and from various agency here, US EPA. I have Kashal Sam, and me just 1 second here. I've lost my ability to get to my other screen. One moment. And maybe I just have you introduce yourself, Kashal, um, if you wouldn't mind. I have the pleasure of working with you, and invited US EPA Region 5 to join us. And Kashal was very willing and to join us and be a part of today's presentation. So go ahead if you'd like to
Well,
introduce yourself.
thank you for the introduction, Jennifer. Hopefully all of you can hear me. Again, my name is Kashal Saum, and a lot of people call me Kush. I have been at EPA Region 5 in Chicago, which is the regional office for the United States EPA. We cover 6 states, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. So we work with the state agencies together to try to address various programs and implement various programs, including the P2 program that Jennifer often deals with. And I also work with CAM regarding toxics release inventory. I happen to be the TRI coordinator for Region 5. And so many of you may have received emails from me regarding data quality calls, and that's me. So if you have any questions about toxics release inventory, I'm the person to talk to. I'll have my contact information at the ending slide. And I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen. Jennifer, is it possible for you to allow
Yes,
projecting screen?
and just one moment, if you just a moment, I forgot to add to one thing that I wanted to share, um, and then I'll release that.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks. So just one other item of general housekeeping for today. We ask that you mute your microphones and turn the video off. If you do have questions, please put those in the Zoom chat feature, and we will have Cam Machino looking through those throughout the presentations, and he will present your questions to each of the speakers today. Yes, there's Cam. And we will also send you a link to the presentation at the end of the day. Actually, it'll be probably late this week. We'll have it posted to our website. We will have a certificate of attendance for you. And if you also would be so kind to fill out an evaluation for us, we would be grateful for that as well. So I'm going to stop this share here and allow Kush to take over here. And Kush, we can't hear you right now, so I need to unmute yourself.
Okay, I think we got it all set. Can everybody see my slides? And Jennifer, I assume you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Looks
great. And you
great.
can see my
Thank you.
slides. Great. Thank you so
Mhm.
much. And again, just wanted to let you know I've been working with IDEM for approximately 25 years back in the day. I used to work with Janet McCabe, and of course Janet McCabe is the deputy administrator for EPA at this point. So she had a very stratospheric rise up the ranks and is the second in command of EPA, and many of you know her very well. But one of the things that we are really focusing on is communities and environmental justice. And environmental justice is the disproportionate impact on communities of minority communities, of people below a poverty line. And so we are really focused on communities at this point. And so the Toxics Release Inventory is a program that is a community right to know program. And we'll get into that very soon in the next few slides. Well, today we'll review program objectives and requirements under EPA's Toxics Release Inventory, or otherwise known as TRI, with an added emphasis on the addition of per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, by Section 7321 of the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA. In addition, we'll discuss the purpose of adding your pollution prevention, or P2 projects, to your TRI form, and conclude with a review of additional guidance on reporting to TRI. Fundamentally, TRI is a community right to know program, like we mentioned, that collects data on toxic chemical releases and other waste management practices from certain covered facilities, and then makes that data available to the public. Specifically, TRI data can tell you about releases, waste transfers, recycling, and pollution prevention practices that occur at more than 21,000 facilities across the United States, covering 770 individually listed chemicals and 33 chemical categories. TRI statutory authority is based upon Section 313 of the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, or EPCRA, of 1986. So it's a program that's been around for a little while. Facilities in covered industrial sectors meeting certain activity and employee thresholds are required to report chemical releases to air, water, and land, as well as other waste management activities. This data is reported to TRI and EPA. Those TRI forms are forwarded in many cases to states and tribes each year via standard forms either Form R or Form A. We'll talk about the difference between those two forms, and are due by July 1st of the following calendar year. For example, reporting year 2020 will be due July 1st of 2021. Many facilities have already submitted their data, their Form Rs and Form As into the system already. I think we've gotten about 50% of the facilities already reporting about 2 months before the deadline, which is fantastic. EPA curates this data, performs data quality checks, and makes them available through web-based query and visualization tools such as mapping tools and fact sheets like EnviroFacts, if you've seen that, as well as downloadable files of raw data for custom analyses. So you can go online and actually look at the data in different formats and different spreadsheets. If you're familiar with Excel, Microsoft Excel, you can actually look at that data in different ways. Under the Pollution Prevention Act of 1990, TRI covered facilities also report data on pollution prevention activities in Section 8 of the Form R. Information on pollution prevention activities reported to TRI are also available to the public, and these best practices may be of interest to other facilities within an industry sector, and success stories are periodically looked at across sectors for purposes of expanding technological knowledge. Much of EPCRA focuses on apprising first responders and emergency planners of chemicals in communities. However, Section 313, or TRI, is not focused on risk or does not directly respond to risk. It's a community right to know program. EPA has received questions on if PFAS will be reported for Tier 2 submissions. That would be Section 311 of EPCRA. There is currently no regulatory action to make PFAS chemicals reportable on Tier 2 submissions, but this could change in the future. PFAS is in a flux right now, and we're trying to figure out what level of detail we need to ask for in terms of reporting moving forward. And this is our first year, starting July 1st of 2021. We will be starting to get quite a bit of data, hopefully, from facilities regarding PFAS. TRI information serves a series of purposes. First, the public is provided access to information on toxic chemical releases. Second, government agencies and academic researchers utilize TRI data to support rule development, such as for the Toxic Substances Control Act. Many of you are familiar with that, which was amended in 2016. The Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act are also two programs that utilize TRI data to develop regulations and rules. And as mentioned previously, facilities within or across industry sectors can share information on pollution prevention best practices. It's important to note that not all facilities are required to report to TRI. Let's have a closer look on what types of facilities must report. First, a facility must be in a TRI covered industry sector. These sectors include manufacturing, coal, and oil-fired electricity generation, certain mining facilities, hazardous waste management, and federal facilities per executive order. Second, the facility must employ at least 10 full-time equivalents. This includes contractor staff under specific conditions. We will get into that detail in a future slide. Finally, the facility must manufacture, and that's a defined term, manufacture, process, or otherwise use more than a certain quantity of TRI listed chemical per year. There is some variance in these thresholds across the TRI chemical list. For PFAS, which we're talking about today, this threshold is 100 pounds per PFAS chemical. Facilities meeting all three of these criteria are required to report to TRI. An important note is the activity thresholds are based upon manufacturing, processing, and otherwise using a TRI chemical, not on how much of a chemical is managed as waste. For example, For PFAS, a facility could release a single pound of a TRI listed PFAS, yet still trigger reporting because it manufactured more than 100 pounds of that PFAS chemical. Here's a visual to reinforce the logic to determine if a facility must report to TRI. Note that all criteria must be met to trigger reporting. This slide shows a summary of the facility data provided to TRI on a typical reporting form. TRI reporting includes information on the on-site and off-site management of a chemical, which includes multimedia reporting, that is to land, water, or to air, as well as pollution prevention data. Covered facilities also provide information on transfers to off-site locations. Some care must be taken to understand what is meant by a release as reported to TRI. A chemical misconception is all releases are, by definition, uncontrolled, such as spills or leaks. However, releases, by definition in TRI, also includes controlled releases, such as stack emissions, which may have a baghouse or some other control device, discharges to water, which may go through a treatment facility at your facility or your plant, or publicly owned treatment works, or otherwise known as POTWs, as well as disposal at landfills. These are all controlled sources of pollution into the environment, and they still must be reported to TRI on your form. Though the reporting season begins each year in January with the release of updated reporting forms and instructions, and those are typically called the RFI, reporting forms and instructions, and those are published usually in January and February of each reporting year. The month after the reporting year. So that companies can determine exactly how to report. So it's a one-stop shop to find out exactly what you need to do for your reporting for TRI each year. So it's a very, very important and critical piece to follow when you do your reporting each year. So reporting forms and instructions, or RFI. Any additions to the TRI chemical list very well might be in or will be in that RFI. And we do update chemicals every year. This is no exception, of course, with PFAS being a new set of chemicals that we're including in on the TRI list. The TRI program operates on a consistent annual cycle. We have a specific schedule, and this particular slide shows that schedule. Once the reporting season ends on July 1st, EPA begins data quality checks, and that's where we send emails to many of you. Many of you have received, as I mentioned earlier, emails asking to have you look at your data to determine if it's accurate. The background of that is a lot of times we'll look at the TRI data that was submitted at July 1st of each year for the previous reporting year, and we'll see some anomalies sometimes. Sometimes companies will go ahead and put a decimal a decimal in the wrong place on a number that they report on their form, or they forget to add in a certain section on a Form R. So what we do is we try to reach out to companies that have obvious errors so that they could fix it before we even get into any type of enforcement or compliance. It's just a way of cleaning up the data. And we're actually required as an agency to do 600 of these data quality inquiries through our national program guidance. We do, quite frankly, orders of magnitude more than that number. This particular cycle that we did was around 1,000. By the end of July, the preliminary data set is typically available to the public. EPA also begins pulling data to evaluate and publish in its annual TRI national analysis, which is typically released in January the following year. So that national analysis is our song and dance in terms of what TRI, what has been reported nationally on TRI, and you'll see a lot of articles, newspaper articles, and TV stories about what the increases and decreases are in terms of pollutants. This is where it's coming from, that national analysis in January of each year, typically January of each year. With the addition of PFAS for reporting year 2020, we're already getting increased interest in data availability. EPA is making it easier to query for PFAS and TRI data by making PFAS one of several available flags in its downstream tools. Just to be clear on how EPCRA defines the word facility. A facility is all the buildings, equipment, structures, or other stationary items located on a single or contiguous or adjacent site under common control. The other definition that I like to mention is full-time employee is considered, or what is called a FTE. Thus, having 10 or more FTEs at your site triggers reporting if you meet the other criteria. And 10 or more FTEs is equivalent to 20,000 hours annually of work by these employees. If you meet that, you will meet that particular criteria for TRI. You must report if you meet the other criteria. Most people are familiar with covered activities under TRI, which are manufacturing, processing, and otherwise use. It's worth mentioning here whether storage of PFAS containing firefighting materials is reportable. Storage of chemicals and fire suppression equipment that is not used is not considered a manufacturing, processing, or otherwise use activity. However, if a facility exceeds the manufacturing, processing, or otherwise use activity for the same PFAS elsewhere at the facility must consider the quantities in storage toward the maximum amount on site and include any releases from the storage of the PFAS in the Form R, e.g. accidental discharges in Section 8.8, emissions, leaks, spills, etc. You have to put in all those details into your Form R if you manufacture, process, or otherwise use. If you just simply have a system that stores the chemical without using that chemical, you don't necessarily consider that in terms of whether you're above the 100-pound threshold for a PFAS chemical. Here's just a refresher of what data fields are included on the TRI Form R. EPA recently published a clickable version of the Form R and Form A, which links each form section and its associated data fields to pop-up descriptions, and also links to relevant Q&As or question and answers. Beginning with the 2013 TRI reporting year, EPA required all facilities to submit all TRI data electronically using its web-based TRI Made Easy, or TRI-Me Web. Many of you are familiar with TRI-Me Web. The application is housed in EPA's Central Data Exchange, or CDX. TRI-Me Web integrates an adaptive user interface, onboard error checker software, tutorials, and a help and reference system known as Guide Me to simplify and streamline the reporting process. New this year, Guide Me also includes the clickable Form R and Form A interface I just mentioned, as well as improved chemical lists and a database of non-chemical TRI regulatory actions. Speaking of PFAS that we mentioned earlier, now that we've refreshed our knowledge of TRI and the reporting process, we can move on to focus on PFAS additions to the TRI chemical list for this year. The National Defense Authorization Act of fiscal year 2020, or NDAA, particularly Section 7321, added many PFAS to the TRI chemical list outright and establish triggers for future PFAS additions. Listed here is a link to a website EPA manages that summarizes these additions and provides updates on implementation activities. Jennifer will be sending you a copy of these slides for you to click these links and investigate further and research further on what I'm mentioning. Note, of course, that the NDAA, excuse me, added many, but not all PFAS. There are, in many estimates, thousands of PFAS out there. We're only talking about a couple hundred of PFAS that we're focusing on. Some of the major ones like PFAS and PFOA are ones that we're looking at. Each one of these PFAS chemicals have a CAS ID, Chemical Abstract Service. So you can look up these individual PFAS chemicals by that CAS ID, simply because a lot of these names, a lot of these PFAS names are just quite huge, 50 letters in many cases. So having the CAS ID is actually a very important tool to be able to keep everything straight. EPA also has received questions on what products commonly contain PFAS. These include water and stain repellent materials, firefighting products, coatings and cables, paint additives, and nonstick coatings. So if you have any of these products that you manufacture, process, or otherwise use, I would suggest you look further and ask your supplier what's in that material. Initially, Section 7321 of the NDAA added 172 PFAS to the TRI list, which became effective January 1st, 2020. Thus, TRI data for these PFAS are due July 1st of this year in 2021. The NDAA also set a lower activity threshold for PFAS of 100 pounds. This threshold applies to each individually listed PFAS, not the sum total of the group as a whole. So we would be talking about 100 pounds of PFAS or 100 pounds of PFOA, for instance, not an addition of all the PFAS chemicals that are listed under TRI. It's also important to note that while PFAS have a lower activity threshold, they were not added as a persistent bioaccumulative toxic chemical, or PBT, and are not considered as chemicals of special concern for TRI reporting purposes. PBTs, many of you are familiar with those types of chemicals. There are about a dozen of those chemicals that have lower thresholds in the TRI chemical list. Some examples of those chemicals are lead, which is a 100-pound threshold, mercury, which is a 10-pound per year threshold. Dioxin has got a, I think a 2 nanogram or some nanogram level threshold. So we're talking about a specific PBT chemical list, and PFAS right now is not on that list. So that makes a big difference in terms of determining whether there are exemptions that apply to PFAS for the PBT chemicals. For instance, de minimis thresholds are not considered for PBTs, but PFAS is not a PBT. So therefore, de minimis thresholds are considered. So we'll talk about that in a future slide. The NDAA also identified specific triggering activities that would add additional PFAS to the TRI list in the future. For reporting year 2021, this particular year, the NDAA automatically added 3 more PFAS to the TRI list. A rulemaking to update the CFR Code of Federal Regulations. Obviously, the Code of Federal Regulations is the listing of specific regulations that interpret the laws that are established by Congress. And they were included within, they will be included within the CFR imminently. It is possible that based on data reported in these first few years, EPA may refine requirements on PFAS reporting to TRI. To get in the nuts and bolts, paragraph D of the NDAA requires EPA to assess the TRI listing suitability as provided by EPA 313 or TRI for most other PFAS that have not been added to TRI by the NDAA, providing a 2-year window for EPA to conduct these assessments. And paragraph D then provides a 2-year window from a positive determination for listing to then add the PFAS to the TRI list. Under EPCRA 313, EPCRA may add a chemical to the TRI list if EPA determines that a chemical is known to cause or can reasonably be anticipated to cause significant adverse acute human health effects, chronic adverse health effects, or ecological effects of sufficient seriousness to warrant reporting to TRI. Paragraph E of the NDAA indicates that before any PFAS with the identity that is protected from disclosure under TSCA confidential business information, or CBI, protections is listed on TRI, that EPA follow a substantiation and resubstantiation process. Once the process completes, such PFAS would also be added to the TRI list. Getting into reporting PFAS, while the addition of PFAS to the TRI list has received a lot of attention, practically speaking, there really is not much difference for reporting PFAS than for reporting non-PFAS. It's very similar to many of the chemicals that we already have on the TRI chemical list. As such, GuideMe certainly remains as an authoritative source of guidance and question and answers that are just as relevant to PFAS as they are with any other TRI chemical. Nevertheless, EPA has compiled a page of PFAS-specific guidance at the address shown here. Naturally, communication with the TRI program on both PFAS and non-PFAS remains more than welcome. And I will emphasize that you can please give me a call or send me an email if you have any questions on specific regulatory interpretations that you may need to get answered moving forward. And if I don't have the answer, I will get you the person that will have the answer at headquarters. Questions and comments on reporting the TRI web application and GuideMe help improve the process in the future, hopefully. This being the first year for PFAS reporting, will expect lessons learned to inform future guidance that EPA would make available to the regulated community. So this is the first year we're doing PFAS, and obviously we're going to come up with some roadblocks here and there. You know, it is a big change to TRI without a doubt. We are talking about at least a couple hundred chemicals that we're adding onto the list, probably the biggest addition that we've had in years. So we're trying to address as many questions as possible with regards to PFAS applicability and how to report. Form A is something we mentioned earlier. I'd say about 99.9% of all forms that are submitted through TriMe Web is a Form R, which includes comprehensive information of emission releases, et cetera, that we mentioned earlier. But there is something called a Form A, which is an option for some facilities who would report to TRI. To refresh on Form A, in certain situations, TRI facilities may make use of the Form A certification statement. While most reporting occurs on a Form R, facilities may be able to make use of the abbreviated Form A if the associated alternative threshold is met. The Form A does not provide details on releases or other waste management, but rather simply provides the identity of the chemical being reported on. To use the Form A, the chemical must not be listed as a chemical of special concern when we're talking about PBTs like lead and mercury and dioxin. If you're releasing, or I'm sorry, if you are reporting for one of those chemicals with the lower thresholds, then Form A is not possible here. PFAS chemicals are not one of the chemicals of special concern or PBTs, and thus can be utilized under a Form A if it's applicable. Essentially, if a facility manufactures, processes, and otherwise uses less than 1 million pounds, and the total annual waste management for the chemical is less than 500 pounds, then the Form A is available. In this context, annual waste management refers to the sum of all releases, including disposal, recycling, energy recovery, and treatment of the chemical. This is just a slide summarizing some of the exemptions that are available for TRI reporting, including the janitorial or facility grounds maintenance, de minimis, and personal use exemptions. I will say that some very unique scenarios have arisen where EPA has provided specific guidance. Some of these scenarios are available on TRI's Q&A resource, question and answer resource, and are also described as examples in the reporting forms and instructions document that is issued every year, or RFI. The de minimis exemption allows for a facility to discount certain toxic chemicals from the threshold and reporting calculations in certain situations. First, the chemical must not be listed as a chemical of special concern, or a PBT. At this time, the added PFAS are not listed as chemicals of special concern, or PBT, and thus a given facility's dealings with a listed PFAS could be eligible for de minimis exemption depending on the specifics of the facility. Second, the chemical must be present in a mixture below the de minimis concentration level applicable for that chemical. The concentration level is 1% or 0.1%, depending on whether there is data available from certain sources that indicates the chemical is a suspect carcinogen. For the added 172 PFAS, the concentration level is 1%, except for PFOA, for which it is 0.1%. The de minimis exemption can be a bit complicated at times, but keep in mind the overall idea is that it allows for chemical quantities to not be considered for TRI reporting purposes, provided the chemical is in a mixture that was received from off-site and during processing, does not go above the applicable de minimis concentration level, or was coincidentally manufactured as an impurity that remains in the product distributed in commerce. The exemption does not apply to manufactured chemicals except for those coincidentally manufactured as impurities that remain in the product that's distributed into commerce. It does not apply to waste received from off-site or purposes of waste management, or chemicals labeled as chemicals of special concern, or PBTs. The de minimis exemption is not available for chemicals of special concern. As we mentioned, to drive it home, PFAS are not currently categorized as chemicals of special concern or PBTs, and thus de minimis exemptions is available. Once you get a copy of these slides, you'll be able to hit these links. And these links provide additional guidance on reporting for the TRI program. These links are active in the PDF copy of this presentation that we'll provide. These next few slides are useful for PFAS reporting in general. First, what is meant by the requirement to use, quote, best readily available information in the TRI realm? Well, TRI requires facilities to use the best readily available data, including monitoring data that are collected pursuant to other provisions of law. When and where such data are not readily available, facilities are to use reasonable estimates. Further, when available data are known to be non-representative, facilities must make reasonable estimates using the best readily available information. This may include published emission factors, material or mass balance calculations, or engineering calculations. It's important to note that emission factors or calculations should not be used if more accurate data are available. Also note that TRI does not require an additional monitoring or measurement beyond what other laws or regulations require, or that are a part of routine plant operations. So we're not asking you to do additional testing beyond what is required by other regulations. A few notes and examples here. If a safety data sheet lacks information, then there is no TRI requirement to contact the supplier. However, if the reporting facility does contact and receive detailed information, then that information becomes readily available. If it turns out available data are in fact non-representative, then reasonable estimates can be preferable. If data are wholly unavailable, then the maximum emission level as specified in a permit could be the basis for a reasonable estimate. Finally, if there are no data indicating a chemical exists in a waste stream, then it is reasonable to assume the concentration is 0. However, if there is a reason to believe a chemical is present in a waste stream, then it's acceptable to use half of the detection limit. One aspect to consider is what's readily available may change over time. For example, when presented with new information, a facility may change its finding of what is best readily available. The takeaway here is that for any decision on what data to use, a facility should carefully document its decision-making, whether it includes assumptions and calculations or other methods, and maintain such documentation to support its reporting decisions. The TRI program does have enforcement inspectors that do inspections to determine compliance at facilities, and they do a number of inspections across Region 5. So having that background information, that data, many facilities use spreadsheets to have all that data in one place for that inspector to review when they do the inspection is going to make your life a lot easier. So I would suggest having your ducks in a row, have all your documentation ready to go before an inspection may occur. And I'm not saying an inspection will occur. There are some inspections done every year, but it's good to be ready for it. To touch briefly on chemical information management for reporting to TRI, it's important to account for all non-exempt manufacture, processing, or otherwise use of Section 313 chemicals or TRI chemicals. Typical points of entry at a facility include purchasing, materials brought on site by contractors, materials associated with capital and direct purchases, as well as sometimes overlooked direct and indirect materials, and those generated from manufacturing as byproducts or intermediaries. Here's a summary of information sources which may be useful for making threshold determinations. When identifying chemicals and concentrations, information sources include safety data sheets, of course, and sometimes environmental data supplements and addendums, product specifications, industry standards, data from waste profiles, operator process knowledge, or emission factor references and supplier notification. When calculating thresholds, relevant data may include inventory and purchase records, the facility throughput or production data, and a series of other environmental permits and reports which should be available to the facility. Here are just some notes on determining concentrations in mixtures or other trade name products, and these can take some time to get used to. For example, if the SDS, the safety data sheet, provides an exact concentration, then use that. If the SDS provides only an upper bound, that is, a concentration is stated as less than the current a certain percent, then use that. Things get murkier when concentrations are expressed in other ways. When provided as a range, the midpoint should be used. For example, if the STS states a chemical is present between 30 and 50%, then use 40%, which is the midpoint. If only a lower bound is provided on the SDS, then it's appropriate to count for other constituents. If there are none, for example, the SDS states that at least 75% of a mixture is a toxic chemical, but provides no other information, then it's reasonable to determine the concentration to be the midpoint from the top of the range at 100% so that 87.5% is used because it is a midpoint between 75 and 100. Finally, if an SDS provides only the lower bound, but identifies other constituents, for example, 15% water, then based upon information in hand, the range of the toxic chemical is between 75 and 85%. Less than 15% that is water. Thus, the midpoint is 80%. The same rationale can be applied to concentrations in waste. It's appropriate to make an engineering judgment if the concentration of the section 313 listed chemical or TRI chemical is below the detection limit. As previously stated, if the section 313 chemical is expected to be present in the waste, it's appropriate to assume the toxic chemical concentration is half of the detection limit. On the other hand, if the section 313 chemical is not expected to be present, it's reasonable to assume the concentration is 0. Here's a refresher on supplier notification. A supplier must adhere to supplier notification requirements and inform downstream recipients of mixtures and trade products containing TRI reportable chemicals, including PFAS. A facility may also elect to contact a supplier to help it comply with TRI reporting requirements. If the supplier is not required to provide notification on a TRI listed chemical, then the TRI reporting requirements require only that the facility use its best available information and estimation techniques. Here are a few final words on supplier notification. Section 313 requires that those who supply mixture or trade name products to covered facilities to identify Section 313 chemicals by both name and chemical abstract service numbers or CAS numbers, provide their concentration as well as being subject to Section 313 requirements. This frequently is done via SDSs or safety data sheets, which typically are provided with shipments of the product. Suppliers are also required to provide notification to recipients when changes occur. And I've gone through a lot of information through these number of slides, about 30 slides, and wanted to offer my help with any regulatory interpretations you might need help with moving forward. And I encourage you to either give me a call or send me an email at this contact information at this slide. And I'd be happy to help out. And again, if I'm not able to give you a direct answer, I will be able to find the right person at headquarters to provide an appropriate answer to your question. Right now, I'd like to open up the floor to a couple of questions. I know Jennifer and Cam have their slides, and we've gone through a number of slides and spent a lot of time on TRI specifically. So I wanted to open it up for just a couple of questions. If you can go ahead and speak up, please.
Yeah, Coach, we have a few questions in the chat. So I'll go ahead and ask them. If anyone has any more, we'll go ahead and ask them as well. The first question is, how do you determine the applicability threshold and reporting quantity for anhydrous ammonia used in the heat treat process? The anhydrous ammonia disassociates in the heat furnace. Any residual ammonia is destroyed in an incinerator at a destruction efficiency at 98.5.
Okay, so in other words, with regards to any chemical, we're not talking about the release of the chemical into the environment. That is not the threshold. Threshold is manufacture, process, or otherwise used. So if you're putting in anhydrous ammonia into your heat treating furnace, is that amount above the reporting threshold of 25,000 pounds of anhydrous ammonia? And if that's above 25,000 pounds, assuming that the de minimis threshold doesn't apply, it's above the de minimis threshold, then you would need to apply need to report via Form R or Form A if appropriate.
Thanks, Kush. The next question is there any guidance or emission factors for estimating air emissions from resistance, for example, laser welding? Couldn't locate anything in AP 42.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. I used to be a air engineer for a number of years, about 25 years, and AP 42 is not the end all be all of all emission factors, unfortunately. I wish they had emission factors for every single type of process, but they don't. And it's a compendium of emission factors that covers a number of industries, but not all industries and not all activities. So in terms of finding emission factors that are outside of AP 42 that you may not be able to find in AP 42, my recommendation is to contact your industry association to see if they have any emission factors available there. There are other types of emission factors and other sources of information, emission factors like fire, EPA fire database. But if there is another stack test, for instance, that another company has used, and that stack test may generate a emission factor, that may be the best readily available information you may have. And you may be able to use that if the type of process is similar in technology to the type of process that you are estimating your emissions for.
Thanks, Kush. And then there's one more. It pertains to PFAS. Would you like to review as it pertains to fire suppression quickly? Do we only report quantities in these products if the fire suppression is utilized?
That's actually a very good question. So the question would be whether or not, let's say, I'm not sure exactly what type of PFAS that is in the fire suppression system. Let's say if you're a military base that has a PFAS suppression chemical in your system and you're not using it, and you haven't used it for a reporting year. That is not applied to the amount that you manufacture, process, or otherwise use because you're not using it. If you were to utilize that firefighting foam and it's above 100 pounds of a PFAS chemical, then it would be otherwise used, in which case you would apply it to the 100-pound threshold.
Thanks, Kush. And then we did have a question about sending the slides. Jennifer just put in the chat that we'll be sending out a link to the presentations and it'll be posted on IDEM's website by Friday. So does it look like we have any more questions in the chat? So thanks again, Kush, for presenting today and answering our questions.
All right, great. Well, thank you all for listening in and hope you can contact me if you have any questions moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And I know that we had one additional question for Kushal. Are you still available, Kush?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah, I see the question. Yeah, we're actually in the process of figuring out how many PFAS chemicals are in products that we typically manufacture, process, or otherwise use, and the emission factors are in flux right now. Obviously, the methodology utilized to estimate the PFAS chemicals is being developed as we speak, as well as for water, for air, for all the media. And so at this point, we have to utilize best readily available data to determine if there is any PFAS chemicals in your on your STS. And of course, if you're complying with the supplier notification requirements, then obviously you have to use the best available data you have available to you. And if you don't know of any PFAS, then obviously you can't report it.
Thank you for answering that question. And now I will share my presentation with you. And as we mentioned before, these presentations will be available online after the E101 has concluded. Actually, by Friday, we will have them posted to our website, and you will also be able to get a full recording of today's event. And if someone can let me know if you see my slides correctly. Perhaps I'm not seeing that yet.
Yep, we see him, Jennifer.
Okay, thank you. And let's go ahead and get going here. So my name is Jennifer Collins again, and I am the Pollution Prevention and Compliance Assistance Manager at IDEM, and we are located in the Office of Program Support. So today we are covering the items here on the screen, what pollution prevention is, a little bit about the Pollution Prevention Act, pollution prevention defined, exploring the benefits of pollution prevention, how the Toxics Release Inventory relates to pollution prevention, and identifying pollution prevention opportunities, and a little bit about strategies and resources that are available from us. The Pollution Prevention Act, obviously from 1990, is a national policy that basically said, wherever possible, pollution should be reduced at the source. And if not, then it should be recycled. And if you can't recycle it or prevent it, then you should treat it in a safe manner. And if not that, then as a last resort, you should dispose of it in an environmentally safe manner. So we typically see this in this hierarchical form of waste management. So here at IDEM, we also include, pollution prevention and source reduction are synonymous. And we also include reuse in that category as well. It's anything that reduces the pollution from the source where it's originated. And generally, any of the actions that are taken after that, the recycling, composting, energy recovery, treatment, and disposal are not considered pollution prevention. So we want to focus a little bit on going deeper into the definition. And so what we're talking about today is the toxics release inventory. And so in pollution prevention, we look for those hazardous substances or contaminants that are entering the waste stream, and then we go upstream to see if we can somehow eliminate those from the process. And so that also reduces the hazards to public health associated with the release of those hazardous materials. P2 can also be other types of things, equipment or technology modifications, process or procedural modifications, so a behavioral change that reduces pollution from the start, product reformulation or redesign, substitution of raw materials, and we talk a little bit about that when we are looking at the toxics release inventory, and we're thinking, oh no, I don't really want to report any longer to the TRI. How can I get myself out of it? Is there another option for us to replace the pollutant or the chemical of concern? And then improvements in housekeeping, maintenance, training your employees, or inventory control can also be huge pieces of pollution prevention. We also have other practices that also increase the efficiency of use of raw materials, or somehow reduce the use of water, energy, other natural resources. So we're protecting those or conserving those, and that's also considered pollution prevention. As I mentioned, pollution prevention does not include recycling. We have some folks that get a little confused about that at times. Um, so the only type of recycling is your in process. So if you're inside of the process recycling some sort of chemical within that, that's still considered pollution prevention. Or energy recovery is the same way. But if you're treating or disposing something or incinerating, we're just altering the substance. We're not considering that pollution prevention. And anything that's not necessary for the production is not considered pollution prevention, or if you're creating new risk to human health and the environment. So we don't want to transfer the emission from air to water, or to, somehow you're not going upstream if you're just adding on a control device. So we're going to explore a little bit the benefits of pollution prevention. P2 really has significant benefits for your business and for any operation. So it's a business strategy for any size company to implement. We're looking for ways to make your business more efficient, reduce possible regulatory requirements based on, like we said, having to report a chemical that you're using. And you can also have internal social benefits to your workers. So we're going to focus here a little bit on the evolution of an organization's environmental management. So early and before the 70s, we saw that a lot of companies were not prepared for environmental regulations. They really had a lot of non-compliance and pollution going into the environment. Once the EPA began regulating folks, we saw the companies becoming more reactive, and then some moved into compliance. We saw more get on board, and then we saw a turn in the 1990s towards pollution prevention. It was more market driven, and now we see more competitive advantage being placed on those companies who are creating sustainable products, or also using sustainable practices within their companies or businesses. So we're looking forward to seeing more and more companies move in that direction. But we definitely get an opportunity to work with the leaders in our state, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. So why do pollution prevention? The P2 benefits are for the planet, people, and profits. Excuse me. And sorry about that. My slides are frozen, so just a second. There we go. So taking a look at the benefits to the planet, obviously, if we're reducing waste from the start, we have conserved landfill space, our disposal capacity, we're reducing energy use, the pull on natural resources is reduced as well. and just an overall decrease in all sorts of pollution going out into the environment. We also, like I said, we have a benefit on people in our communities. We also improve things for our workers, the health and safety. If you're, using some sort of solvent and you're exposing those workers to that solvent, you may want to reconsider that. And that's on the health and safety side, but it also may benefit you in the long run for pollution prevention and reportability. Also, you most likely would see improved morale if the workplace is safer for your employees, and improve productivity and motivation and innovation in their work. We also see a reduced risk for consumers of products that have less toxics in them, improve public relations, and a better public image. That more sustainable company getting more attraction from their consumers. The surrounding communities is a huge, huge piece of this. We're seeing a lot more focus on environmental justice and the um, the impact to the communities surrounding the businesses that operate in their neighborhoods. So if you're looking at pollution prevention, you're able to reduce that impact to the surrounding neighborhood and create a more viable environment for operating as a business. So you'll also want to look at the profits. You'll see improved regulatory compliance and reduced regulation if you are reducing the toxics that you're using at your facility, or even just waste or energy. You'll see reduced cost related to managing waste, other future liabilities related to your waste, hazardous waste management, the material consumption, the cost of bringing a material into your facility, using it in your process, and then having to pay for disposal as well. So you've got to think about those pieces. You'll see process improvements and expanded markets potentially. And we also ask, why do P2? Because it's the right thing to do. And we say yes, absolutely, because it's the right thing to do. And we have member companies within some of our voluntary programs that implement pollution prevention, even though there is no monetary gain for them at all. It's just the right thing to do for them and for their company. So related to the Toxics Release Inventory, the Pollution Prevention Act of 1990 did say that the Toxics Release Inventory could collect information from the facilities, the industries, on the reductions that they are making with waste generation and the waste management alternatives. So many of the facilities that report to the TRI are also providing information about those reductions. And you can also do that, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. So we can use it as a tool for identifying environmental practices that you may want to implement, or highlighting your own pollution prevention successes. So how we would do that is to have, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So the reporting facilities have 3 different ways that they're reporting things. So there's a breakdown of production related chemical waste that's managed. And then there's a ratio or activity index to provide context for the reported toxic chemical quantities. And there are specific W codes that indicate which type of source reduction was implemented. And then you have an opportunity to also provide a little bit of text in there. And so that would benefit your facility and other facilities like you in knowing more about how you reduce that toxic from your facility. So the use of the TRI data is important to in a couple different ways. So first, using the TRI data for your own facility to identify historic trends. And if you have multiple locations, you may have differing processes at each one. They have multiple releases. You can use the TRI Explorer to take a look at the trends at each facility, those historical trends. And you may be new, you may be a new environmental manager and you don't know what has been reported in the past. You can also see those trends. And you can identify pollution prevention opportunities from those trends. You can see what things have been done in the past, and then also show your pollution prevention outcomes. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And also benchmarking against other facilities in your industry is something that you can do with this data. So what I'm talking about is the TRI P2 search tool, and it is located at this link. And once you receive these presentations, you will be able to click directly on this and go to it. So the search criteria that are available are industry sector, chemical group, the year of the report, the state, and a zip code. So this is important because then you know how to get to the data that you want to see. In the example that I've included, we have a facility that's located in Scottsburg, Indiana. And when I pulled their P2 information, they are, this is Multicolor Corp located in Scottsburg, and it provides their TRI facility profile in their submissions here. But what I was looking for was the trend history here. And so they have a history of releases related to glycol ethers, and they reduce those over time. And you can see this trend. And this is, like I said, a wonderful tool for you to look at your facility, your past reporting, and see what your trend is. Is it going down? Is it going up? Has it stayed about the same? You can also see here if it was released, if it was treated, how it was reported in the past. You also get a waste management comparison that's available, and you can see your trend in just a different format by year, and the other type of comparing that to other reporters in that same industry. The source reduction information that's available, it also will tell the specific W code, and as I mentioned before. So the reductions related to this facility were a reduction in, or where they modified their design or composition of the product in 2011. And they if you noticed before, they completely reduced the actual use of the glycol ethers. So you want other facilities to see that about your company. And what is really helpful here is that you can share how you did that. And there's another section that I had cut off on this one, but it also would tell more detail on how they conducted the pollution prevention project to get to that point. As I mentioned, the benchmarking is a way to enter the industry code. As I mentioned at the top of that search, you can look at your industry and look across the industry to see if other facilities have reduced certain chemicals. And you can find other businesses that you know specifically that do the same type of operation as you, or have some component of your operation to compare what types of chemicals are they using. Are we along the same lines? Are we doing better than they are? Just to have that um, ability to say to your customers or to your management, we are doing better than they are, or we're doing worse. So now we need to implement some other ideas. So that brings me to just some strategies and some resources that we'd like to provide for you, and have some time here to cover these. So one of the things that we first recommend that a facility do is to conduct a preliminary assessment of your facility. So you're looking, and this will help you not only in your reporting to TRI, basically looking at the expanse of your facility for all chemicals that you have, that you're manufacturing, that you have byproduct as a byproduct. So you're looking to see what's going into your process, what's coming out of your process, and identify those. And you may want to do some process flow diagrams and add, baseline information to those flows, and really detail exactly what it is that you have at your facility. And get your employees involved. Other people within your facility know information that you may not know. If they have, maybe they know, hey, I put this solvent into this bin every Tuesday, and you have no idea because you're not the one out there on the floor. But they know, I'm using this every single Tuesday, and how much they're using of it. So you really need to get involved with them and find out, what it is they're actually using on the facility's production floor. You'll also need to think about other data that you would want to include in your assessment of the facility. So there's a lot of different data sources that are available. Invoices and bills from utilities. You're going to have different operational maintenance reports, tracking reports of handling, storage and losses. Purchasing records are really critical piece, knowing what chemicals are coming into your facility. Any other inventory records? What do you have on hand that you're storing already? That's where a lot of folks get into trouble. We've seen not only from the TRI perspective, but also from hazardous waste management. If you're storing things and you have no idea what's in your closet, so to speak, you'll really encounter some issues. So making sure that you do know specifically what's at your facility, and are there multiple locations of those storage areas. Also looking for your SDS and your batch sheets. How is the material actually being used at your facility? Do you know for certain how it's being mixed, where it's being applied? You need to find raw material inventory records and other production sheets to really dig in and characterize, what's happening at your facility. You may have some process engineering information, the plans of your facility or plant have diagrams and other things that you can label and know where certain things are stored at your facility. Also, regulatory information is really critical. Any permits and waste shipment manifest your biennial reports, environmental audits, and inventories. And looking at your past DRI, I would say here. So we have a lot of research and technical resources. When you identify those things that are already being used at your facility, you want to start thinking about technical resources that you might want to tap to find alternatives. We have trade associations that you can reference, and I know a few folks on the call today have used information from their trade association to implement new ideas and move away from other toxics that they have previously used. Published literature, magazines, case studies. We have a lot of that available on our website, so I'll give you those references in a moment. We have the EPA and other state and local environmental agencies as resources. We have university and engineering departments, equipment vendors, and suppliers to rely upon, and consultants. You really want to work with, if you're working with a consultant already, talk to them about pollution prevention. Maybe they're helping you with your toxics release inventory report, and maybe you haven't had that conversation with them about, how do I get out of the reporting of this chemical? How would I switch to something different? I don't want to keep having to report this chemical every year. So let me figure out a way to alter our process and get out of that regulatory requirement. And other companies, and I'll talk in a moment about that voluntary program that I spoke of before, that you can really use as a tool for your own benefit. And P2 resources. So this chapter 8, as it's referencing, is a P2 module that we have available on our website, and we have a lot of resources linked on that module, and you'll receive a link to that. I'll actually put it in the chat later on today. Excuse me. So you're looking for within a P2 process, you're looking for these ideas, these type of substitutions, operational improvements, production changes, redesign, waste stream segregation. If you have something that also has water and another chemical, is there a way to separate that out before you need to dispose of it? Is there better inventory control? Closed loop recycling. We've seen companies recently where they found a way to recycle their lubricants in their system and reuse that within their process. So they weren't losing that. It wasn't used up after one time through. So they have now a way to recycle that back through their system. Best management practices and training for your employee. It's really critical. Some of those best P2 ideas are just behavioral. And, one company comes to mind is they were leaving on a faucet. It was at a food manufacturing facility, and they were leaving a faucet on just day after day, running water day after day. Gallons, hundreds of gallons, millions of gallons of water going through the plant, and the person had no idea why that was running. It just always had. So when an auditor came through and said, look, do you know why you're running that water? The person said, no, it's just, my predecessor had done it that way. So I just thought there was a reason. They ended up saving a lot of money based on just turning off the faucet. So it doesn't have to be a big P2 investment. It can just be small changes that really make a big impact. So as I mentioned before, as you're going through your process, you're going to want to look for baseline data, so that you know, hey, I'm using this much at this point in my process, and what is my target then? How do I want to look for reductions in that area? And then, create either, a material input chart, material emissions, some sort of document that says, here's my baseline in this area, and this is my target. I'm going to reduce it by, X% by a certain date, set yourself a goal. Um, but you do want to remember that we don't want you to shift the waste from one side to one area to another area. So please avoid doing that. Your baselines are really, like I said, critical. We use those within our voluntary programs, and it will demonstrate the incremental changes that you make in your process. So please do make sure that you are recording that information. If you have a newer process, you could use estimates from a similar process or something in other facilities that you've seen. Just make a good estimate, and then if something needs to be altered, make note of that and then adjust your calculations. So like I said, select a quantity, measure that quantity, normalize the data as necessary. If you're not familiar with normalization, we're looking at ways to um, relate it to your production so that it's not fluctuating with, a reduction in your production isn't considered P2 just because you didn't produce those certain items. You're actually wanting to make the steps towards pollution prevention, and instead of accidentally reducing something. So some strategies, just quickly, I know I'm about out of time here. Some strategies that we have, and I'll just mention that these have a lot of information related to them, and in our manual online, and I didn't have enough time to go into specifics today into each one of them. So if you're interested in any of these P2 approaches, I'll put the link in the chat, and you can go investigate them today. So we're looking at environmental considerations into your business planning process. So that is, whether you have an environmental management system or you have some policies in place for purchasing that really affect what chemicals come on site. You are looking for process, equipment optimization, redesign of your process or modernization of your process. We've got some great suggestions in that area. Product design, product reformulation, and product stewardship. So knowing how your product will impact in the future, the waste disposal side of things. Are you preventing pollution in the future? Purchasing and inventory management, as I mentioned earlier, is critical. Are you buying things consistently without knowing where they're being used within your facility? Are you just, you've lost a can of the solvent and you're replacing it without knowing if it was actually used? Excuse me. Improved maintenance and housekeeping. So that is also very critical. If you have poor maintenance of a piece of equipment, you may lose more parts, or you may encounter issues that really could have been avoided. And it might cost the materials that were going into your process. It could also, raw materials, chemicals that are being used in the process may have to be discarded. So you're wanting to make sure that you have a good plan in place for that. receiving and distribution policies. We've had many companies that have come through our voluntary programs look at this. Are they using returnable dunnage? It's a huge supply chain type of P2 practice that reduces that solid waste that's coming in and out of your facility. Are you looking at green building or infrastructure changes to our ground management changes? So reduction in watering and mowing and things like that can also really help at your facility. And a huge resource on energy usage and energy conservation and efficiency in the manual that we have available online. And I'm gonna leave it at that. So the resources that we have available for you, our compliance and technical assistance program, and I'll go more into that program in a moment. We do provide some assistance on pollution prevention opportunities. We have a resource online that will allow you to do self-assessment, and we're happy to look that over with you and walk through your facility and help you identify opportunities. We also provide sector-specific guides on our website, and we are happy to do in-person training if needed. We also have the environmental stewardship program. It's a voluntary program for those facilities that have an environmental management system in place, and it provides incentives and benefits to those facilities that participate in the program, such as reduced regulatory reporting and compliance inspections, um, announced visits, and some other things. So I'll go more into that. We do have a round that's open right now until the end of May. Our Indiana Partners for Pollution Prevention is another networking group that we are a part of. It has over 100 members now in Indiana, and lots of variety of companies that you can also network with. So it's free to attend the events. There's 4 quarterly meetings and an annual, sorry, 3 quarterly meetings and an annual conference in September that we host. And we love to share pollution prevention information with everyone who attends, and we are also putting companies together so that they can share P2 ideas and transfer the technology from one facility to another. We also work with some other folks, the Indiana University Environmental Resilience Institute. We are working with them on a project related to our Clean Community Challenge program. And they have some money available that they're working on projects for climate change. So if you'd like more information, we've got some more information from them. The IUPUI Industrial Assessment Center also provides assessments to facilities who qualify. So you can check out their operations. They will come out and do a facility assessment of your energy side of things. So, as you see here, they are really good at finding great reductions and saving you some money. The Purdue University's Technical Assistance Program, that's available to every single company here in Indiana. It's 40 hours of technical support from a faculty member at Purdue University. So check this out. Highly recommend that. We also have a partnership with the Manufacturing Extension Partnership at Purdue, and we are currently in the midst of doing a grant with them for some assessments. So just some other resources that we have, and all of these will be available for you to peruse at a later time once you receive the PowerPoint from us. So that wraps up that presentation. Did you have any questions Kim?
We do not in the chat.
Okay, if you had any questions for me on that, I'd be happy to answer them. I will also share just quickly about our compliance and technical assistance program, and then we will wrap up for the day. So most of you may be familiar with the Compliance and Technical Assistance Program. We are a free and confidential program. We're non-regulatory, and we cover multimedia. We're not just focused on air regulations like some of the other small business environmental assistance programs are around the country. We do cover air, land, and water and other types of environmental issues. So free and confidential, we are available at no cost, and we do help businesses of all sizes. We have worked with existing facilities, new businesses coming into the state, governmental agencies, and other trade associations and other consultants and stakeholders. We are covered by confidentiality. 1328, Indiana Code 1328.3.4 mandates that we cannot share any information about who we have worked with in this program. So unless you provide us a waiver of confidentiality, and if there's a clear and immediate danger to the public and environment, there is a worksheet that we have to go all the way up to the commissioner. And as far as I'm concerned, we will work with you to try to get the appropriate action taken before we go that route, unless there's a really strong risk to the environment. And I think they've only had to potentially go through that route one time, and the company said, well, wait a minute, we'll fix that. So just letting you know, we are fully confidential. We are not regulators, and so we don't issue the violations, permits, fees, fines, or take any enforcement actions. So you will not be penalized for working with us. And if you provide us relevant information, like I said, that will stay with us. As I mentioned, we do cover multimedia focus. So we deal with a lot of variety of issues: air, water, land, waste, TRI, self-disclosures. We work with folks on pollution prevention assessments. We do provide some training, as I mentioned earlier, on a variety of things. And we're located all around the state. So we have a northern regional office, northwest, northern, central office. We have four staff that go on site and handle the calls and emails that come in, and we also have a small business regulatory coordinator, Angela Taylor, who does other work with IEDC and the other small businesses. We have Southwest office and a Southeast office as well. And so you can see our map online, and if you need to get a hold of us, we suggest using our new portal. So we help with a variety of things, like I said, with permit forms. We can find guidance for you, tools, training. We've even recently put together a list of grants that are available for certain industries. So it's really a good deal for you to give us a call sometime if you, or go in through our portal if you have an opportunity or something that you need assistance with. So like I said, you can receive assistance through our online portal. It is secure and confidential, comes directly to the representative in your area. And we do still have our hotline, so if you need to call us, you can contact us on the 1-800-988-7901. Our online portal is available to you. You just need to create an Access Indiana account. That is part of the security of the system. And you can submit confidential requests to us, communicate back and forth with the direct CTAP staff on there, and you will be provided information on your case and your question right in the portal. It remains confidential and accessible to you, and you can go in and out of it as many times as you would like. Like I said, that's available through Access Indiana. And here's the link to that. And it's also on our website here through our online portal. We also provide site assessments, free consultations on site to look at a specific issue and or look holistically at your site. So I'm gonna breeze on through some of these. We're running out of time here. So just know that we're available if you need us. We do provide these trainings. You can find those at that link that was mentioned. Workshops and other technical presentations. And like I said, online resources galore. So feel free to contact us anytime, and we are happy to assist. And one other thing I just wanted to mention real quick, we do have, like I said before, we have some things going on. We have 6 spots left on the P2 grant with Purdue. And so please check that out when you receive these slides if you are interested in a waste stream mapping assessment. And we have some recycling market development program grants going on. There's $50,000 to $500,000 available for recyclable material collection projects. And so more information can be found online at the item website. And those applications are due by June 23rd at 5 p.m. So feel free to contact us for more information. And that's all I have for today. All righty. So do we have any additional questions before we wrap up?
Not seeing any in the chat, just a lot of thank yous. So thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you very much, Cameron, for your assistance today and working in the background and answering folks' questions. And once again, thank you to US EPA and Kishal Sam for providing us excellent technical information about the Toxics Release Inventory.